Ever so often, Mark rolls around as a lectionary reading. Preachers, no matter how long we may have been at it, sometimes we come to Mark and we say, wow, I don't know that I want to do that. Maybe we need to shift off to one of the other Gospels. I said to people on the beach this morning, because we read the text there, that I thought that Mark had such an ambiguous ending that that's why we got to Matthew, Luke, and John, because they could look into the future and they could see Easter morning in the West and know how many unemployed trumpet players there were who needed a gig. Because you don't get that kind of excitement in Mark. It's just not there. You say, well, that's not all the verses in Mark. Yes, actually it is. There is a longer ending that was extended by somebody, and then an even longer ending extended by somebody else, but almost all the scholars clearly understand that Mark quit at verse 8. That was his gospel. You don't get angels and earthquakes. You don't get all the major kinds of things when you come to Mark. You get what you get. A missing body, ambiguous stories, people gripped by fear, uncertainty. In some ways, it's better that we get Mark on occasion, because in the world in which we live anymore, Mark maybe reflects what some of us feel coming up to Easter morning. We want to believe about Easter. We want to jump up and down. We want to jump up beside the trumpet player and blow the horn. But somehow, deep within us, there is this nagging wondering. And we almost hear Peggy Lee singing in the background. Is that all there is? That'll take you back a while, won't it? I can only say when I read Mark, it takes me back to a journey. And when I was pondering the sermon weeks ago, I had no idea how even more loaded it would be for me through these past couple of weeks. October 3rd, 1980, something happened in the life of my first wife and oldest daughter and myself. A child was born. Someone we longed to have. New beginning and new life. How great is that? After our first child, we had decided to have no more. And so, being the noble person you know me to be, I decided that I would make sure that that didn't happen. But then we changed our minds, and being the noble person, and actually the only one that had a choice, I underwent some surgery so that we could pursue pregnancy again. And on that early morning, 9 months earlier, New Year's weekend, I was supposed to start my ministry in Richmond, and it snowed 18 inches. So when my wife went to the hospital, and we got to the hospital after dropping Elise off with a neighbor, people were having babies everywhere. And so she came. And I was given, it was planned that once we were sure that Judy was okay and she had gotten moved to some space where they could find, in this case, I was to go call people in the early morning hours, because that's what they wanted. Parents says, oh, you don't need to wait till 9 o'clock. Call me when it comes. And so I did. Called my friends. Shared the joy. I dropped Elise off at school that morning on about 2 hours sleep, and I went to the hospital, and when I got to the door, this doctor came out. I didn't know who he was, and he just nodded, and I went on in, and then he figured out I must be the dad, so he turned around and came back in. I would call this doctor if I actually knew his name. I can't even remember it from when he told me, because he'd been contracted by our pediatricians to check on our newly born daughter, because they didn't work south of the James River. So he comes in, and I just kind of imagine him as being, Ichabod Crane. He may have been a little shorter. And he stood there with his bow tie and his Adam's apple, and he said, we think there's a problem. We've got all these different measurements. Doctors have measurements. And so we believe that there is a problem, perhaps genetic, and it may mean nothing. Or it could mean the worst. That's how he put it. And so I'm standing there like, what am I supposed to do with that? Judy was stunned, and so I sat with her. We sat in silence. And later in the day, I went to take care of Lisa and the business at hand. I had some work that I needed to make sure the secretary got in the office. I went to visit a couple of members who invited me over to their house for dinner. And so I went back to the hospital, and we sat there again, and we talked. And then I went to my member's house for dinner, and frankly speaking, they were kind of, they were New Yorkers. They drank. So they sat there and shared libations, and we talked, and I cried. I didn't even know at that point what I felt. The next day, I had it clear in my mind that a gift had been given, a wonderful gift, like the first gift. And I would find a way to celebrate Easter, this wonderful new beginning. In the months that came, there were challenges. There was procedure at the Medical College of Virginia, and then there was another procedure, and then there were problems and so forth and so on. I don't need to go in details. But what I'm trying to say to you is I kept waiting for the big Easter. I kept waiting for this one I loved to be made whole on Easter morning, to everything would be glorious and everything would be right, and trumpets would sound and things would be perfect like every parent, we expect of our children, even when they're 7 years old and they still haven't grown up yet. Some of you here know what I'm talking about. But Easter didn't happen that way. And that's when my journey began of understanding the power of Mark. That Easter comes also in subtle ways, in small ways, and small victories, and small spurts, and graces that we didn't see coming, and celebrations that we never thought we would imagine, and hugs and kisses and songs, and the beauty and wonder of parenthood that comes with the travail of parenthood, no matter who you are. That's how Easter is, I think, in terms of what Mark's saying. It's ambiguous. It doesn't always look one way. It doesn't always come in dramatic fashion. Sometimes it is in the small ways you open your heart and you open your guts and you open yourself to relationship and your eyes open and suddenly you see what you haven't seen before. Christ present. Wonder everywhere. Mystery blooming. I've pastored people who, when they were in hard places, felt like if we could beat enough drums and sing loudly enough, and I know of at least one person in Delaware, if we could sing enough bad cantatas, that surely Easter would look like what we think Easter should look like. But Mark says the body was missing. There was a whisper that resurrection had took place, but nobody seemed to see or know anything. And they were afraid. I'm just letting that settle in. And so you come today seeking, I come seeking. We all come as a community hoping and expecting and enjoying and praising God. Thanks be to God. But we never really know what Easter will look like, no matter how hard we work to try to control it. It just doesn't work that way. And we open our hearts and we open our minds and we open our hands, and suddenly there's a tap on the shoulder, and we look around and we hear a whisper. I'm here. And I won't go away. I am with you. Walking today, and I'll be walking tomorrow, no matter what your gate may be. I am here. I am risen. And sometimes we shout hallelujah. And sometimes we whisper back, thank you. I needed that. So today, when you leave this place, be ready for the tap on the shoulder, wherever you may be. Who knows what that whisper may sound like in your ear? Who knows what it may feel like in your heart? And who knows the power of the one behind everything in the mystery that is manifested in small but powerful ways? Even at table, with something so simple as bread and juice. He's risen. He is risen. But receive him on those terms, not on ones that you want to enforce.